So among the processes on your SMT line, stencil printing is arguably one of the most important. Many times it's the first step which lays the foundation for bonding components to the board and sets the tone for the success or failure of the rest of the process. Any issues in this step are hard to fix down the line. Today I'm excited to be joined by Kyzen's Debbie Carboni, Global Product Line Manager for Electronics, to discuss the importance of cleaning during a stencil printing process and how we can tune that process to have the highest chance of success. All right, Debbie, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing
Great
great
to have
today.
you on the show. So first, can you tell us about stencil printing and just give us a baseline of what it is and...
Absolutely. So when you have a stencil printing process, basically you're taking your board and it's that first step. You have a bunch of pads on there and you take your solder paste and you place a stencil over top of it. It's very much like printing a t-shirt. And you put the solder paste on, you squeegee it over top, and then you lift that stencil up and you're left behind with solder pads. And from that process, you go through and place your components and it goes through your reflow process.
Okay. So can you tell us about some of the common misconceptions around stencil printing, especially regarding the cleaning of the stencils?
Well, that's actually a very, very interesting question because I will tell you that most people, they really believe that using a solvent actually creates a lot of problems in the process. And they do almost everything in their power to avoid using a solvent. They wipe as little as possible. They often don't know exactly why they've selected to do a wipe process after 1, 3, 5, 10 prints. But as much as possible, they try to avoid it. It's actually said that out of any one of the chemistries that's on the manufacturing floor, the under-stencil chemistry is probably the #1 misunderstood chemistry.
I can understand that. Now, what about misconceptions regarding the use of solvents themselves or choosing a solvent? Like, for example, if I say I want to use IPA because it's, it works. I don't have any issues. What do you have to say to someone who says that?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, IPA, it turns out, is actually flammable, and you're kind of putting a bomb in your machine. Even when you mix it with water, it is a little bit of a problem. But most importantly and factually, IPA is a terrible solvent for most of your modern solder paste today. They do not solubilize them, and in some cases, they actually create a rather nasty goo. And as I mentioned, when you're trying to print something and you're trying to have nice, clean lines, just like what you would want on your t-shirt,
Right.
you're making goo, and so therefore you no longer have good definition.
Makes sense. So while we're talking about this stencil printing and wiping process, can you tell me more about the wiping step and maybe the different parameters that might be involved in setting a good wiping process?
Sure, absolutely. So you have 3 main processes within this. First is you have a vacuum, you have a dry wipe, and then you have a solvent wipe. There's different forms of how that solvent is applied to it. You have a roller type, you have a dispenser type, you have a spray type as well. There are different schools of thought as to which sequence you need to use within that. One of the areas that really actually hasn't been studied is, how much time do you need within that process in order to have the most effect? For many years, it's been believed that you need the least amount of chemistry because you are afraid that you're going to impact that nice solder brick. You don't want that chemistry creating slump or impacting the definition of that solder brick. So you try to set up those steps, the speed at which that wiper is moving,
Okay.
and then also the sequence, whether it's a dry wipe first or whether it's a vacuum wipe first. Should you end in a vacuum wipe or should you end in a dry wipe? And we've seen videos, we actually have done some videos quite a few years back where we showed that using a vacuum wipe actually prevents those solder spheres from jumping back up into your aperture walls. Yeah. Likewise, we've seen some data where in some cases a dry wipe is the best form of action and the best path forward. Really, it's looking at that process and understanding each of the steps and the impact it has.
Okay, so let's say I have a poorly defined or a poorly designed wiping process. What could happen down the line if I don't do that right?
Ooh, lots of defects, lots of misprints, failures, solder balls.
Yep. Okay.
You name it. There's actually, some experts will say that up to 85% of the defects are actually caused in the printing process.
Okay.
So that's a pretty high number. And there's really no way to fix that other than create more defects along the way. So when you're dealing with defects, that causes rework and that's added cost to your process as well as time.
Okay, so the bottom line is that we need to clean our stencils in order to increase our yields.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what we're actually finding, we'll be introducing a paper at Apex this year. And one of the things we found is that some of the historical tribal knowledge, which is as little as solvent as possible, may not actually be the best path forward. And so some of the data that we found was rather intriguing, and we're looking forward to presenting it and to doing some additional studies.
So that does sound very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that. So last question, for those viewers out there who might be having some issues with their printing process, do you have any advice for them? Maybe where they can go to get information, or maybe certain things that they might want to check first before they kind of run off into the internet?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of good information. Crochet has an excellent form of printing for nerds, which she has on her website. It's shaysmt.com, and she has produced quite a bit of papers. There's also the SMTA. There is a tremendous amount of papers on that, and Kyzen has also done a tremendous amount of papers, and I would personally be happy to share those papers with individuals, and they can always contact one of our team members.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you very much for your insights. All right, if you like that content, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Also, if you have any questions about stencil printing, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can send them to AskDrAdam at Kyzen.com. Thanks again, and stay clean.